Namaste. My name is Sudan Rai, and together with my groupmates Silly, Fiza, and Shifu, we'd like to present to you the macroeconomic study of Nepal. So, what is macroeconomics? Macroeconomics is the field of economics that studies the behavior of the overall economy. Specifically, 1. The changes in employment and unemployment. 2. Economic growth. 3. Government economic policies. 4. Inflation. And last but not least, number 5. The National Bank decisions. Nepal is a landlocked country in South Asia with a population of a little more than 27.8 million. It is sandwiched in between China, which is at its north, and India, which is at the other end of the nation. Nepal is where 8 out of 10 of the highest peaks in the world are located at, the highest being the world-famous Mount Everest, or Sagarmatha as it is commonly known to the locals. It runs on the Federal Democratic Republic form of governance, which means there's only one main government body with sub-unit government bodies reporting to it. The President is the Chief of State, whose duties are merely ceremonial, while the head of government is the Prime Minister, who has the highest powers in the decision-making of the country. An economic overview of Nepal. Excuse me. Nepal is among the poorest and least developed countries in the world, with about 1/4 of its population living below the poverty line. It is heavily dependent on remittance, which amounts to as much as 22 to 25% of GDP. Agriculture is the mainstay of the economy, providing a livelihood for more than 70% of the population, and accounting for a little over 1/3 of the GDP. Excuse me. The service sector, which is where the hospitality and tourism industry comes into play, contributes to the majority of the GDP, 48.7% to be exact. Industrial activity, which mainly involves the processing of agricultural products such as sugarcane, tobacco, and grains, contributes to about 15% of the GDP. Nepal has considerable scope for exploiting its potential in hydropower, with an estimated 42,000 megawatts of commercially feasible capacity, which can far greatly overtake the current largest hydropower plant in the world, the Three Gorges Dam, which is in China. The Three Gorges Dam has a generating capacity of only 22,500 megawatts, but due to political uncertainty and a difficult business climate, foreign investments have been greatly hampered. Additional challenges to Nepal's growth includes its landlocked geographic location, persistent power shortages, underdeveloped transportation infrastructure, civil strife and labor unrest. And not to forget its susceptibility to natural disasters as well. A lack of political consensus in the past several years has delayed national budgets and prevented much needed economic reforms, even though the government last passed the full budget in 2013.
Okay, my name is Silly. I will explain about the macroeconomics problems in Nepal. Despite internal and external challenges, Nepal has managed to maintain overall macroeconomic stability through prudent fiscal and monetary policies. The average gross domestic product (GDP) growth rate during the fiscal year 2007 to 2013 since the end of its civil conflict has been 4.4%, and it is higher compared during the conflict, which is 3.8% for the year 1996 to 2006. Now, I will explain the economic growth in Nepal. Despite the global economy slowdown and a difficult and protracted post-conflict political transition, Nepal's economic growth and overall macroeconomic situation have been stable. Furthermore, Nepal maintained an average real GDP growth rate of 4% during 2010 to 2013. The major contributors to service sector growth were communication, wholesale, retail trade, transport, and storage. all grew at more than 5% annual average between 2010 to 2012. The second variable is inflation rate. Inflation edged up to 9.9% in 2013, largely because of a low agriculture harvest, successive increases in petroleum price, and a continuing depreciation of Nepal's currency against the United States, and moreover, high inflation in India, which is Nepal's largest trading partner. It is because the Nepalese rupee is pegged to the Indian rupee. Furthermore, during the first decade of the 21st century, Nepal's performance in economic growth has been disappointing. GDP growth exceeded 5% only in 2007 to 2008. It is very particularly disappointing in the growth performance of the manufacturing sector, and GDP growth has by and large followed the growth of agriculture. I will provide the table. The table 1 provides a picture about the growth performance of Nepal's economy over a longer term period in the past. Furthermore, the contrast between the performance during the 2000s and the early years and the early 1990s becomes clear from the data that I present in the table. At first, the economy attained reasonable growth between 1986 to 1995. It is after that year, the downslide started, especially in terms of GDP and manufacturing growth. In addition, the manufacturing sector also recorded modest growth during the above-mentioned period, like GDP growth. The other variable that affect macroeconomic in Nepal is the changes in employment and unemployment. In Nepal, labor force has been growing at the rate of 2.6% per year during 1998 to 1999 and 2008. Even large number of workers finding employment abroad, open unemployment has continued to increase in Nepal, rising from 1.8% in 1998-1999 to 2.1% in 2008. Moreover, the rate of unemployment is much higher in urban areas, 7.5% in 2008 exactly. It thus seems that in Nepal, open unemployment is basically an urban phenomenon. It is clear from an increase in open unemployment and time-related underemployment that the employment change in Nepal has remained serious despite larger numbers finding jobs abroad.
Trade policies. Nepal's growing trade deficit is clearly eminent as its exports occupy a negligible share in the world market. Export comprises of 8% in the national gross domestic production compared to 26% of imports. The making of an independent economy has been a challenging task in view of rising share of loans in the foreign aid over the past years. Since Nepal has adopted the policy of achieving two-digit economic growth in the coming years, it is necessary to pursue the path of export-led growth and enable exports to cover substantial portion of imports and make exports inclusive, linking it with poverty alleviation program. The government economic policies. After a difficult year in FY13, economic growth in Nepal is expected to recover to 4.5% in 2014, according to the Nepal Economic Update April 2014. The rebound is expected to be driven by increased agricultural production and continued service sector growth supported by strong remittance inflows. Second, inflation remains high in FY14, with the average for the fiscal year expected to be around 9.8%. Last year, unlike in FY13, the main driver of inflation is food prices, despite expanded agricultural production, reflecting the extent to which prices of food in Nepal are tributary to those prevailing in India. Third one, Nepal should achieve a twin surplus for the second year in a row, reflecting healthy developments, particularly domestic revenue mobilization, but also deep absorptive bottlenecks, which are really missed opportunities for growth. Fourth, first, the slow pace of budget execution has translated into a sizable budget surplus that is not leveraged to build the country's infrastructure. Second, the sharp increase in remittances has more than made up of Nepal's chronic trade gap, but it has also resulted in a build-up of liquidity in the financial system that may be in excess of the private sector's ability to translate it into sound credit. Fifth, the enabling environment for development has improved. The successful election and subsequent formation of a popular mandated government provide a more conducive environment for private sector activity and also economic policy. Going forward, it will be important for the government to signal from the start that increased political stability will be put to profit to tackle the country's formidable challenges. Next is the policies and development challenges. The new government will have to focus resolutely on removing constraints to public and private investment, without which growth will not accelerate significantly in the near future. Areas where the major bottlenecks to unlocking investment supported growth include improving public financial management systems, addressing systemic weaknesses in the budget preparation and execution process, continuing good governance initiatives and tackling issues in the two big and critical infrastructure sectors, transport and energy. Outlook and the risk. For 4Y14, the outlook is cautiously optimistic. The previous assessment estimated that growth would reach 4 to 4.5% in FY14, essentially driven by increased agricultural output and improved execution of the budget. While the pace of capital expenditure may be below initial expectations, inward remittance inflows have been significantly above projected levels and should provide an additional boost to the services sector. On balance, therefore, growth is projected to reach 4.5%, especially if capital spending picks up in the second half of the year. Natural bank decision. As remittances have become a defining feature of the Nepali economy, the country must learn to manage excess liquidity. The significant build-up of liquidity in the financial sector reflects both strong push factors, remittance inflows translating into a build-up of net foreign assets, and weak pull factors, which is slow crediting growth and loose monetary policy. In the short term, the central bank, Nepal Rashtra Bank, will need to strike a delicate balance between encouraging sound credit growth so as to not compromise economic activity objectives and containing inflation. At present, this balance is particularly difficult to achieve because of uncertainties over the true health of the banking sector, weak risk management system and market failures. The NRB may need to expand to deal with excess liquidity. In the medium run, resolving structural bottlenecks to efficient credit market functioning is a precondition for monetary policy to operate more smoothly and efficiently, and for ample available resources to be allocated to grow Nepal's reproduction potential. Government policies to minimize the effect of the problem. First, to support the economic development and poverty alleviation initiatives through the enhanced contribution of trade sector to the national economy. Second, to create a conducive environment for the promotion of trade and business in order to make it competitive at international level. Third, to minimize trade deficit by increasing exports of value-added products through linkages between imports and exports trade. Third, to increase income and employment opportunities by increasing competitiveness of trade in goods and services and using it as a means of poverty alleviation. To clearly establish interrelationship between internal and foreign trade and develop them as a complementary and supplementary to each other. Lastly, the strategies. First, creating a conducive atmosphere for making trade competitive at international level. Second, reducing trade deficit through export promotion. Third, increasing income and employment opportunities. Last but not least, establishing interrelationship between domestic and foreign trade. Thank you.
We're going to look at the economic status of Nepal. A devastating 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck the South Asian mountain nation on Nepal on Saturday, April 25th. The quake caused almost 25,000 casualties, including over 7,500 deaths. The earthquake also triggered massive avalanches in the mountains, including one on Mount Everest that killed 19 people. In addition to this tragic human trauma, Nepal will be adversely affected by the economic aftershocks of this disaster for years to come. The economic cost of rebuilding after the earthquake could reach upwards of $10 billion, according to the US Geological Survey estimates. The cost is especially devastating when it is compared to the nation's GDP of only $20 billion. This means that Nepal must depend on foreign aid to rebuild its economy, and even then it will be a long and arduous process. A Singapore-based channel News Asia, quoting documents from the International Monetary Fund, says the IMF expects the Nepalese economy to decelerate in the short term as the nation deals with loss of essential revenue from tourism and absorbs higher costs for imported goods. Analysts are also gritting their teeth as they tally up the damage. Looking into the agriculture, beyond the impact of last year's delayed and light monsoon, the impact of the earthquake on the agricultural production, which accounts for about 34% of the GDP, will be minimal this fiscal year, given that harvesting is already largely completed. However, there has been substantial loss of food stocks and livestock, and aftershocks have swept away farmland in some of the severely affected districts. The 14 most affected districts account for 13.8% of the total area of agriculture holdings. The share of the rice produced in these districts is about 9.1% of the national production, while the area under the paddy production accounts for 8.6% of the country's total paddy area. Given these effects, the loss of farmland and livestock in the severely affected areas, and the recent forecast of a potentially weak monsoon influenced by the building up of El Nino conditions over the Pacific, will likely keep the agricultural sector growth stagnant in the year 2016. Looking into the industry, growth in the industrial sector, which accounts for about 15% of the GDP, has been held back by lack of adequate electricity and other supply-side bottlenecks for a long time. The earthquake further slowed the industrial activities in the remaining months of 2015. Similarly, nearly a quarter of the total hydropower produced in the country is affected by the earthquake. This drastic slowdown in capital spending and building activities following the earthquakes will hit construction. The cumulative impact of this subsectoral development means that we now see industrial growth at 2.3% lower than 3.5% level forecasted in March. In 2016, they plan the reconstruction spending and prospects of hydropower plants resuming normal operation will likely boost industrial sector growth. Looking into the services, there has been a drastic slowdown in the wholesale and retail trade in the severely affected districts as warehouses, shops and trading outlets are only partially operational. Tourism has dropped sharply due to the earthquake, landslides and avalanches. resulting in cancellation of bookings, changed travel plans. Furthermore, the partial openings of banks and financial institutions in the affected districts will slow credit flows and other transactions. The combined effect of these circumstances will lower services sector growth from 5.8% forecasted in March to around 5.1%. In 2016, the rebound of wholesale and retail trade, tourism, and the normalization of financial activities will likely mean the service sector growth will shoot up, despite a potential null in the real estate and renting services subsector.